I am super excited for this conversation. We're coming back kind of from our summer break. So for you, many of you, hopefully you took some time away, didn't think about work too much, but now we're coming back. It's fall, and you know what that means. It is mid-year review time. Woo! I don't know about you. I just hated review. I hated writing reviews. I don't know how many other people felt that way, but we still have to do them because that is part of our jobs as leadership. And that is why we're having an amazing guest today, Miss Heather Kay, who I'm going to let her introduce herself in a second. And we are going to have some fun conversations around difficult conversations. But before we get there, Heather, one, thank you for being here. I'm so happy to have you, and tell everybody a little bit about you.
Thank you. Super stoked to be here as well. So my name is Heather Kay. I have been in human resources for the last 20 something years. Don't even want to talk about that. My background is primarily in learning and development and talent management. But what I do right now is I help people leverage their talents to increase and enhance their success. So I'm really all about helping people grow and develop into the people that they already are. It's not about fixing what's wrong with you. It's about highlighting what's right with you. And something surprising, unlike you, I love performance management. I know I'm so weird like this, but I really think that how often do you get an opportunity to talk about how awesome you are and all the great stuff you've done, or as a leader to tell the people on your team all the great things that they have done and congratulate them? So I really look at performance reviews and conversations a little differently than most, because for me, it's really all about creating that awesome sauce that we want our employees to know how well they're doing so that they just continue to eat it up more and continue to be more productive. So I'm a little weird like that.
Well, let me clarify. I never minded the conversation. I just hated the paperwork part.
True.
Like,
fair point.
We just make leaders' lives difficult with the amount of paperwork we ask them to maintain. But it's all important. So, I mean, but I just want to put it out there for anybody who's like, what is wrong with y'all? Like, no, I get you. There's a part of it I hate too.
Yeah.
But one of the things you didn't say, which is a huge component of why I love your approach so much, is about not focusing necessarily on how to make something you don't do well, but how do we make you stronger and where you are. Is you are heavily a huge advocate and for Clifton Strengths, which is,
Yes.
I think, one of the better like tools out there in helping people understand who they are, how they show up, and really how to help position themselves for success. So do you want to talk about that for just a few seconds?
Oh my God, I could talk about that for years. So absolutely. Yeah. So I have been a certified Gallup trainer, consultant, coach, lots of different areas since about 2015. I've been utilizing the strengths-based development philosophy for years before that. I'm also Myers-Briggs certified, familiarity with DISC, Enneagram. They're all good. Like, they're just different lenses from which to look at. But I agree with you. I love the Clifton Strengths perspective because it's based in positivity. It's talking about you are amazing, and here are the traits and the themes and the strengths that you possess to make you amazing. How do we get you to leverage those and be even more amazing? And we all know that we do things well. Sometimes we don't really understand what they are, why we're doing them, how they show up. So this tool gives you that lexicon, that vocabulary to start having conversations with others, and also get clarity for yourself to understand why you do the things that you do and how you do them. And for me, understanding yourself is extremely powerful to helping you be more effective, more efficient, and more productive.
So we're going to talk about this more because when we talk about our growth and self-awareness, and particularly when we talk about difficult conversations, is understanding how to leverage what you are naturally good at is going to, I think, really important, particularly when we're talking about moments that for many people is a very anxious time. So when we talk about, I would say in most of the work that I do, and I'm interested in your perspective, like it never fails. That's usually one of the top 3 issues is I frequently people are scared of conflict. Like they say they're good at conflict, but then you start really getting into it and you realize, man, like they don't know how to navigate it, or they're good in this arena of dealing with a difficult conversation, but in this arena, they are not. And so it's so interesting to me about how that continues to always show up at a pretty high level as a developmental need within across pretty much most leaders that I've ever dealt with. Have you seen something similar?
Oh, of course. Look, for the most part, people don't want to make other people feel bad. That's generally what
So
we're
let
saying.
me tell you why you suck.
Right, exactly. You are horrible at this. And you probably know that, but let me just pile on and tell you even more.
Oh, I know.
Right? But
Yeah.
thankfully, most people don't want to do that. Like the idea is not to make people feel bad. But I think a lot of times we don't know how to have that conversation, how to have it well. And I think also the other perspective is when we're the ones delivering it, we tend to focus on ourselves as well. Like, how am I feeling? Why am I getting anxious? What am I going to say? Blah, blah, blah. And then the wheels just start turning. And one of the best ways to handle that is just to shut it down and not say anything. But, every piece of data that I have seen talks about ignoring your staff and not providing them with feedback is worse than providing them with negative feedback. So it's really, really important that even though we've all been taught if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all, that's actually not true when it comes to providing feedback. People want to know when they're not doing well because most people want to do a good job. And if they don't know that they're not doing a good job, they don't really know how to fix that.
Well, and you think about it. So one of the things I think is very true is people get wrapped up in like what they're going to say, how they're going to say it. And because they're so scared to hurt someone else's feelings or how someone else will respond. I've seen people do it either one, not say anything at all, which is terrible because then you're blindsiding somebody at review time. If you have to put somebody on a performance improvement plan, that should not be the first time they have a conversation that things are not going well. But also I've seen the other thing happen, and I will own that I have done this, which is because you're so scared of what the other person's going to do, you employ maybe feedback tactic that is less than effective. And for those of you who are, I'm going to call it what it is. It's called the feedback sandwich. And I actually remember being coached earlier in my career that this was a great way to give difficult feedback. So for those of you who don't know what the feedback sandwich is, it's basically where you start with a positive of like, hey, here's what you're doing great. And then you sandwich in the middle everything they're not doing well. But here's where you're not living up to expectation. And then you end with a positive. Right. So, because you don't want them to feel too bad about themselves and you want them to feel hopeful, inspired, empowered. But unfortunately, what I've seen happen is people will remember how it started and people will remember how it ended. And somehow that middle layer, unlike an Oreo cookie, they just forget it's there. And so what'll happen is you can have somebody walk out feeling great, even if their performance is not great. So, so talk to me about that. Like because we were talking about things that just don't work. So why do you think that came about? And, where does it go wrong? Because it sounds good in theory, but it sounds
wrong. Great in theory. It's great in theory. Again, we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We want them to be empowered and engaged, like you said. I think it goes wrong because you're not being authentic. You're not being truthful. And honestly, you're really not respecting the other person. Ultimately, what you're saying is, I don't think you're doing a great job, but I don't really want to tell you that. So I'm just going to make you feel good around it. And to your point, the thing that's in the middle is usually what gets forgotten. Just even think about reading an email, one of those TLDRs, too long, don't read. You remember the intro. You remember what was asked at the bottom, which is why we're taught to have an intro, introduce yourself, say what it is that you're going to ask for. And at the end, restate that ask. The stuff in the middle sort of gets forgotten about. That's more of the specifics and the data and the details. So when you use the feedback sandwich, that's really what you're doing. You are kind of putting those bookends in a way that people will remember those. And sometimes people walk out and they're like, oh, that was great. Like, I was told I was doing a great job at this, a little bit to tweak on here, but she ended with, I'm doing great on that. And again, I think you're not really being respectful to the person, because your job as a leader and a manager is to get the most out of your people. And I don't mean this in a negative way.
Yeah.
You want people to be successful. You want the team to hit its goals and reach their KPIs or objectives or whatever your organization calls them. And if your people are doing great, great, let's cheer them on. If they're not doing great, you want to help them shift a little bit. And that's really what it is. So I think when you use the feedback sandwich, you're kind of missing the boat. And the people are walking out not really understanding what you are saying and asking. So I feel like, to your point, they're not hearing you the way that you probably want them to hear you.
No, so I will candidly say, like I can even think, there's a person that comes to mind where I did the feedback sandwich. Because one, it was a difficult relationship and I was trying really hard to tread lightly. And I thought this would be the perfect way to like hit her where she's strong, tell her where she's really not living. And she really was not performing well. But I didn't want her to feel so demoralized. And, but what I ended up understanding later, and this is why I said this when I started, was when she walked out of our one-on-ones, what she would go and tell people is she was doing great.
Right.
Because
that's what she heard.
Because that's what she heard. Now, whether or not that's what she wanted to hear, or, I can't control what somebody else hears, but what I am responsible for as a leader is how that communication comes out. And because I was overly concerned with her feelings, it actually damaged our relationship because her performance didn't improve. She had to go on a performance plan. She felt blindsided by it. She thought I was the devil. And in her mind, I was, because I just kept telling her she was great because that's what she heard. And so, I can see where as leaders, we have really good intentions. But to your point, we are not serving our team members, because that damaged my relationship with her. Other people saw it and then started to question, like, well, what kind of leader is she? Her team, her person should never have been blindsided by this. And in my mind, no, I had communicated it, but it was the how, which I tell people all the time. It's usually not the what, it's the how of what you did that gets you kind of junked up a little bit. And so that was a hard lesson for me. And again, and to your point, I did it because I was so concerned about her and maybe how did she need to hear it versus like, here's how I think it needs to come out. I just, as long as I'm making sure it's respectful and, that she has an opportunity to give me feedback on what she heard, because again, the sandwich doesn't do all that. Because something you and I have talked about, which I think this gets to, is in that moment, I think about it and I started to chip away at my reputation, my credibility, and whether or not people felt safe with me.
And I think that really, really taps onto something where I think for many of us, we're really focused on those 5 or 10 minutes about what do I do in the midst of having that conversation, or maybe what do I do to prep for that? I think we also need to take a step back before that. And that is, what is the relationship that you have with this person? What is the culture? How have you worked before? So when you have a real authentic relationship with your direct reports, let's say, you're having these kinds of conversations consistently. There is a trust that is, you should be, correct. Fair point, right. But there is a trust that then gets created. That's psychological safety is there. And when I think about psychological safety, I tend to think about it in 2 areas, in camaraderie and in courage. So courage being, I feel that I can share with you how I am really feeling. And I also have the courage to hear what somebody is saying. So we're putting ourselves out there. But the camaraderie comes with being authentic, with being true, with being open to really tell those things. So what I like to coach people on is thinking about feedback a little differently. It's not always about fixing things. Sometimes, and I like to say most of the time, feedback is a gift. I am giving you this content because I care about you and I want you to do better. I am giving you this gift. I am giving you this present because you're not as successful as you could be. And I want you to be more successful as a friend, as an authority figure, as a leader. It is my responsibility to help you be as successful as you can. And that is my gift to you. And I think for many leaders, if you can sort of make that switch to understanding what you're doing is helpful, not harmful to somebody, it makes it a little bit easier to say, you know what, I don't need to sandwich this in, because the person knows I am coming from a place of authenticity, of friendship, of true camaraderie. So that feedback is a gift concept, I think, is one that many leaders, once they start to understand that, can feel better about it.
Yeah.
And therefore it makes delivering that feedback a little easier.
Yeah, I had the fortune of working for a company that was considered feedback friendly company.
Yeah.
And some people might say they went way too far, because when I first started working, and for those of you, I worked at Target headquarters. And when I got there, it was so overwhelming. Like, it didn't matter. Like, if I was in a meeting, if I'd sent out an email, if I presented something in a meeting, or if I created the agenda, like, I was getting feedback pretty much a lot all day. And when I first started there, I felt like this was overkill. I felt like I was drowning in information of like, and it wasn't all positive, which is unique. And so, but what I came to understand very quickly, and it was given by everybody, peers, subordinates, leaders that didn't even have anything to do with the work I was doing, but they saw me give a presentation, or they saw me lead, in some capacity. But one of the things that was explained to me, which I thought was really powerful, and it changed how I viewed feedback instantly, was that as a team, as a company, as a personal brand, like me as Kim, of who I am, we are only as strong as our weakest person. And so our goal is always to say, you may not know these things about you. And so I'll give you some examples. Like, sometimes I got told, hey, your format was wrong on slide 8. Like, you got some things wrong on there. You got a misspelled word. So it could be something as minor as that, all the way to, hey, I want to talk to you about how you communicated this. I don't think you heard, like, this is how it was interpreted. I don't think that's what you meant, but this is how I interpreted. This is how and so, because the idea being is, the better I became, the stronger I was, the stronger the team was, the stronger our division was. And so it never came across as personal. I never felt that any of the feedback was given was personal, and there was no attack. And so I think that that's the difference, is if you can start to make that switch and help your team with the mindset of what it means to give feedback, is that it's not necessarily about you personally. It's about, how do we help you be the best professional you can be? Because that ripples to everyone else. So going back to that psychological safety component of, because I think sometimes people take feedback, particularly critical feedback, very personally. Especially if you don't have that relationship. So I wanted to ask you, because I think this is important, is sometimes you inherit teams. You inherit people. You don't have the relationship. You have to step in and have these difficult conversations. So what have you tried, or what do you coach, or what have you seen really work for people who just don't have that rapport yet? I can come in and say this, like, this is how I view feedback, but is there anything else you would advise people to do if they have to go have a tough conversation with someone they really don't know that well?
So look, I've overseen many teams, and for me, feedback and feed forward are very important. When I interview people to join the team, one of the questions I always ask in the interview is, tell me about a time that you've received feedback. What was it? How did it feel? And what did you do with it? And then I go on to talk about, how do you provide feedback? Because to me, feedback should be a 360. It's not just the manager to the direct report, it's the team members to one another. So when I hire somebody, That's one of the questions I always ask. But when you're inheriting a team, it's not quite as easy. So one of the first things that I do when I take over a team, or when I have taken over a team, is talk to them about my expectations. This is the culture that I am looking to create. And one of the non-negotiables is feedback and feed forward. And we all have to be open. We all have to be honest. We all have to be vulnerable. And I share with them my own stories about feedback that I've given, feedback that I've received, times it's gone well, times it hasn't gone well. And the first couple of weeks, I really encourage them to give feedback to one another. So, if, Kimberly, if you're on my team and John is on the team and we're all talking, I might say, hey, Kimberly, what feedback do you have for John? And yes, I'm putting you on the spot to some degree, but it's coming because I have been clear. So I really do try to facilitate that. And I am more forthright about that at the beginning. So I'm very clear about my expectation. I model the behavior myself.
Yeah.
I share my own stories about times it's worked. And I really facilitate that amongst the team so that they understand I'm not just saying it. This is something that needs to happen and that I really want to see happen amongst you. So that when it comes down to the time where I have to deliver some constructive feedback or directive feedback, people know this is just sort of how things work with me and on the team and how I can help you be more successful.
Yeah. I think modeling becomes really important too. Because I've seen some leaders do that really well, where they will say, what am I doing well for you? What areas could I show up better for you? What do you need from me? And like never getting defensive about it, is simply taking it and saying, thank you for telling me. Now, whether what they do with it, like it can be different, but the idea that they modeled the behavior of, I'm going to take this, I'm going to go think about it. And not not necessarily react in that moment. Because I think that's the other thing too, is understanding sometimes you're going to hear things you're not going to like, no differently than you're going to tell people some things they're not going to like. But the modeling of behavior can really carry. And I think for me, having that formative experience earlier in my professional career of watching that happen, where nobody got mad ever. And I was like, how is this humanly possible? Right. And then I left that and went to a completely different culture where that was not the culture. And it kind of got me burned a little bit because I had to quickly rein it in, because I was like, oh, this is healthy. This is great.
Yeah.
No, that is not how this company operated. Right. But what I would say is what I tried to emulate as a leader was the things that I thought was healthy. So how can I, as a leader, continue to model that behavior, maybe take it down a notch, but continue to model the behavior within that culture so that I could try to create that respect, the credibility, because again, like we may not always agree and we may come back and say, hey, I really listened to what you said. I want to talk about that some more. So that way you're having a conversation from a place that's not fueled with anger or anxiety or something else, other than like a clear thought about, I got some feedback. I didn't agree with it. I'd like to talk about why I don't agree with it. Maybe there's some perspective that's missing. That kind of stuff.
And I also think if you're consistent, so one of the things that I recommend to leaders, and I've done this, the last question of every one-on-one conversation should be, what feedback do you have for me? And if you ask it every time, your direct reports are going to start to say, oh, Heather's serious. She keeps asking about this. It's not just a one-off. She keeps asking about it. And by doing that, you are now creating that camaraderie, that psychological safety. And it's also done at a time when, to your point, there's no anxiety, there's no fear. And the other piece is, while I agree with you, you don't have to take in every piece of feedback. Not all feedback is created equal. I do think as a leader, you need to do two things. First is, when somebody gives you feedback, you always say thank you. You may not agree with it, but the fact that somebody is willing to give you that feedback is say thank you. The second thing is, if you do make some changes, let people know. So you might say, hey, Shirley, I really appreciated that you told me that the way that my emails were worded was a little too harsh. I've really been working on that in the last week or two, so I wanted to let you know that. Have you noticed a difference? If you haven't, so really have that conversation. And now Shirley, my direct report, says, oh, have you heard my feedback? She did something with it, and she's coming back to talk to me. Again, creates that psychological safety. So that's, I think, important. The other thing that I also encourage direct reports to do is ask for feedback. Well, there's nothing wrong with saying to your manager, hey, love to hear how I'm doing. You don't necessarily need to wait until the mid-year report, the end of the year report to make things happen. It's really okay to say, hey, would love to hear how you think I'm doing. And there's lots of ways that people can ask for feedback. So that's another little fun trick that I like to tell people.
I think that's true too. Like, because, and again, I feel like I'm sitting here thinking about how formative that was, because when I wasn't getting it, I felt like I was in this hole. Or that people were scared to tell me. Right. Like, because it's the whole thing. Like, it's a cycle that can build. And I feel like if we just got more comfortable asking for stuff and then just accepting it, because I like the way you said that not all feedback is created equal. Because I've been told things, and like I've been told that I use my hands way too much when I'm presenting. It is such an ingrained trait. I've tried to build, like, I appreciate it. It hasn't stopped.
Right.
I try to be mindful of it. Like those kind of things.
That's when you say to somebody, thank you for the feedback, you smile, and then you go back on your way doing whatever it is.
And then I wave at them. I give them jazz hands. So quick question. So as we're talking about this, so we definitely know, like, don't do the feedback sandwich.
Bad. In my opinion, bad. Yes.
I would personally agree with that, just because for all the reasons we've outlined. I think we set people up. It's the recency effect. They're going to walk away with certain things. But like, again, here's a perfect example. You said the last question should always be, what could I do better as a leader? So
no. So let's be clear. It's what feedback do you have for me?
Correct. Yes. I meant I was saying it from me as a leader. Sorry.
Right.
Like yeah. So the question, so I would flip it and say, so if the feedback sandwich isn't good, is there another like approach? Because I feel like for a lot of leaders, this is just hard. Yeah. And I understand it. And it takes, I think, a lot of practice and experience, unless this is just something naturally you like to do or feel comfortable doing. I think every new leader, I think, could use some help. So is there an approach that you would encourage people to try?
Yeah. Look, delivering feedback is not easy. Let's just start. And especially if you're a new leader or somebody who's not really comfortable in that vicinity, or you're somebody who hasn't created those relationships yet, as we've talked about. So look, there are a couple. So one of them is action impact request. You talk about the action, the impact it's had, and the request, AIR. My two favorites are stop, start, continue. That's number one, where you say to somebody, I'd like you if you would stop doing this, start doing this, and continue. I've actually used that with my kids, and it's worked great. I'll tell you that. Please stop throwing things at each other, start being nice to each other, and continue to have conversations. Like, so stop, start, continue.
There you go. That is very direct feedback.
Very direct feedback. And you can be very clear. And it's also stop, start, continue allows you that flexibility to say that, look, you are doing things that are going well. Like, continue to do this. Like, that's great. The one that I like for delivering constructive or direct feedback is the STAR technique. Okay. STAR is an acronym, like everything else we have, for a situation, task, action, result. So I'll say that again: situation, task, action, result. So you start off by rephrasing the situation that person was in, because it's feedback. So it's something that's already happened. You talk about the tasks that person did or did not complete, the actions that they may or may not have taken, and what the result was of that situation. So it makes it very objective. We should always be concerned about people's feelings, of course, but I think a lot of leaders get really caught up in that. If you can be clear, about whatever it is that feedback is, by saying, here's the situation that you were in, here are the tasks and actions that happened or maybe didn't happen or didn't happen as well. The result is blank. and therefore we need to change things. You can also use star if it's positive. Again, feedback is not always about fixing things. Feedback is also about saying, Kimberly, you're awesome. Like, I saw you do this, and you had all of these pieces and the result was amazing. So, but I really like star as a method to deliver feedback.
You know, it's funny. So you're reminding me of so in interviewing, there's the
Yes.
SBO,
Yep.
situation, behavior, outcome. It's
Okay.
it's the same concept. Like,
Yep.
tell me a time when, and then
Right.
what did you do or not do, and then what was
Right.
the outcome? And so
Correct.
again, it's allowing for context around what the situation was.
Yep.
And again, same different letters, but same thing.
Same
What
concept.
did you do? And so it gives them a chance to talk about maybe what their perspective was, but then you can also provide the outside perspective of here. I
Yeah.
hear this, what you felt. Here's what I saw
Correct.
in the
Correct.
behavior. And then let's talk about the outcome. So what has happened as a result? And again, to the same thing, that process is used. I've used it a bazillion times in interviews, and usually it's
Yes.
used in a positive context because you're trying to get
Yeah.
a job. So I like that a lot. And again, I think if you get into the habit of that's just how you expect conversations to go when you're giving feedback, I think
Hmm.
your team will even start to prepare that way.
They
Is
will.
here's what's going on. And it also helps, to your point, like the ask, like at the end of it, there's an outcome. There's usually something that's needed.
Yes.
And so, here's the outcome. So what comes next, right? What are your
Right.
next steps? Stop, start, continue, I think is great. I've used that in so
Yeah.
many contexts. And I think it's a very smart way. We used to do that a lot when we would do team strategy stuff. And that
Mm,
way everybody got their little sticky pads. So that way no one could be, unless you have a very distinct handwriting, no
right.
one could know what they were suggesting to stop, start, and continue. So it was a
Yeah.
very open way to, and I even encourage leaders to do this with their teams, is like once a year, have a good big team meeting and even ask the
Yep.
team, what would
Yep.
you want to stop, start, and continue as a
Yep.
team?
Correct.
Because there could
Correct.
be subcultures on your team that you're not even aware of.
Yep. Yep. I
So,
think both of these methods can be used in lots of different areas. I
yeah,
agree with you. The STAR technique, when I coach people who are in transition to create their success stories, I tell them, talk about your success in terms of STAR, about what you've accomplished and how this shows up. I coach leaders when they're listening to interviews. You should be listening for the STAR. And if you're saying
yeah,
at the end of the, if you're saying at the end of the response, I don't really know what this person achieved, you're missing that R, that result. And it makes it a lot easier to go back and say, hey, Kimberly, I heard that you did this, this, and this. Can you explain again, like, what was the outcome? What was the result of
yeah,
that? So I love the same thing. I love STAR for lots of different reasons. But I think what's also really nice, because it is so objective, if you are providing feedback to someone using the STAR technique and that person disagrees, they have more clarity now to be able to have a better conversation. Because if I say one of the tasks that you were supposed to achieve was to paint the room blue,
yeah,
well, I think I painted the room blue, but now I can say, oh, Kimberly, like, thank you for sharing that with me on my feedback. And I'm sorry that you didn't think I painted the room blue, but look at my walls. They look blue to me. Where was that miscommunication? So
where is the align? Why is it not aligned?
correct. So
Yeah,
it makes it easier to have a robust conversation versus just feeling bad about the fact that you're coming down on me because I didn't get my work done, and not having that clarity to understand what didn't get done or how it didn't get done. Which kind
yeah.
of, I don't want to say it takes the feeling out, but again, it makes it much more objective about how that works.
Well, I think what it does is it takes the personal heat out, right?
Yes.
Because so often when I've seen things implode, it's because we're using the same words, but we have very different meanings. So using your
Yes.
example of the blue wall, well, that ball maybe needs to be, quail egg blue, not
Correct.
dark blue. Like,
Right.
but because we just said blue and I had a blue in my head and you had a blue in your head, and They weren't the same blue.
Right.
To simplify the analogy, like
Yeah.
that happens a lot where people are saying something similar, but they actually have very different ideas in their mind
Yeah.
about what needs to get executed. And
Yes.
so that's partly why I like it too, is, and again, it takes the personal attack out. Oh,
Yeah.
so we just had different definitions of blue.
Right.
Okay.
Which
So you're
is
not telling me I'm an idiot because I thought that was
right.
blue.
Blue.
Like,
Right. Which
so
is
we
one of
can
the
remove
reasons,
that.
which is one of the reasons for me, I always go back to goal setting,
Yeah.
and having that clarity. One of the things that I love that Gallup does is they have their employee engagement survey, which is their Q12. And it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You start at the bottom and you have to work your way up. So you can't get to what's at the top until the foundation has been taken care of.
Yeah.
The first question is, I know what's expected of me at work. And that goes to expectations, which is goal setting, which is having clarity and communication. So to the point, well, you're coming down on me because I didn't paint this quail egg blue, but you never told me it should be
Yeah.
quail egg blue. So thank you for giving me that feedback. I appreciate that now, because again, you always say thank you for the feedback. How do we remedy this now?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? And in the future, when we're choosing colors to paint, how do we do a better job ensuring that we know specifically what colors? And that now opens up a whole nother line of communication to have with the people, either your manager, your peers, about how you can communicate better, collaborate better, which will then lead to higher engagement, higher effectiveness, efficiency, productivity. So again, this is one of the reasons why I'm a nerd and I love performance management conversations, because it should lead to having better outcomes, which is ideally what we're all looking for. So,
and that's why I was so excited to have this conversation, because one, leading people is hard, right? And I tell people all the time, I think being a leader is one of the hardest things you can do, just simply because you are responsible for so much stuff. And I think until you've been in that role, you can't really appreciate the minutia you're going to deal with, that some of it you have zero control over, some of it you do. And so what I like to do is to try to give leaders what control they can have on in their day. So what are some things that you can do that you absolutely can control that can make your day a little bit better, and ideally make your team's life day a little bit better, because it's a ripple effect completely. So with that, one, I want to say thank you, because I think this is brilliant. And I know personally, I wish I would have had more of this information when I was
don't we all?
which is why I do this. But I just want to ask, so if you had one final piece of advice or something, whether it's a new leader or somebody who's just struggling with how to have these conversations, what would be the one thing you'd say, just make sure you think this or do this?
So the feedback as a gift is a big thing for me. And I think from that mentality, if you can remember what you are doing is helping someone. You are not coming at them from a negative place, or at least you shouldn't be. And if you can remember, you have somebody's best interest in mind, and all you are trying to do is help them be better. So I think that mentality to start with, if you really have that, that will help. But I think as far as sort of preparing, one of the best pieces of advice or tips that I give people is take a breath. Like, just stop, take a breath. What you're going to tell somebody is not going to change the world, not necessarily going to change people's lives. And you got to do feedback early enough. If you wait too long, then it becomes a problem. Take a breath and remember, it's about them, not about you. Don't focus on yourself. Don't focus on how you're feeling. Think about the other person. Think about how they want to hear the feedback, not how you want to deliver it. So, at the beginning, we had started talking a little bit about strengths and understanding, like, that's really where I come from, my perspective. So if you have somebody who has the strength of achiever, somebody who likes to get things done, it's really important to them to have that checklist. If you don't have that theme, and you've got a theme of like maximizer, which is always looking to make things better, you might be saying, oh, I want to hear feedback in a way that's saying you didn't hit the mark because you could have done more and you could have done it this way. And here are some ideas. The person who's got that strength of achiever may not want to hear it that way. They may want to hear you weren't successful at what was on your list. You weren't successful creating that process. You weren't successful with achieving the specific goals that we created. Here's why. And if you're interested, we can talk about how you can work on that in the future. So don't think about yourself and what you need. Think about your direct report or the people to whom you are providing this feedback, how they want to hear it, and just breathe. Just breathe through it. So that's what I would say.
I would agree with that. The only thing I would add is don't give feedback when you are angry.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Like
definitely not.
if you are not in control of your emotions,
right.
that is, do not engage because you're not going to come from that good place of what do they need to hear. You're coming from a place of, I am pissed off. And I like, I am so mad at you, I could shake you kind of thing. And so if you are in that place, you got to step out, go walk around. I'm not saying wait days, but I am saying, like, to your point, you've got to come from a calm place, take some deep breaths. And also, if you find that the conversation is starting to spiral.
Right.
Because that can happen.
Yeah.
What I would encourage you to do is, again, take a big breath.
Yep.
And don't engage in it. And if you need to, pause the meeting and say, hey, I feel like emotionally this is not productive. Like this is not what this conversation's meant to be. I want to make sure we're both calm and clear so we can have the conversation we need to have. And it's absolutely acceptable to do that. That doesn't mean you're a bad leader. That actually demonstrates you're a good leader. Correct. Because you're not going to let your team member say things that they may regret later.
Right. And also,
and you're not going to get drawn into some drama.
Correct. And I'll piggyback on that. Even if it's not emotional, you may have people who need time to process before they're actually able to have an intelligent conversation. So some people you can come and say, listen, I want to talk to you, give them the STAR technique to give them the information. And they're saying, oh, great. Let's talk about the wall. Other people may need to hear that and say, thank you for the feedback. Can we pick this up tomorrow after I've had time to process? And then go back and think about, well, what about this? And I didn't get that. And how do I formulate that? And then come back the next day and say, hey, really appreciate it. Here are some thoughts that I've had, and I'd like to get more clarity on some of those other pieces.
Yeah.
So again, giving your direct reports what they need to be successful. And if they need that time to process, then you want to give them that time. And that, to your point, that makes you a better leader because you're giving them what they need, not what you need. So
yeah, I just can't say that wholeheartedly enough because like I've plowed through. Don't do that. Like if it's spiraling out of control, take a deep breath.
Correct.
And it's okay. Like it's okay to back it up and just try it again. And the other thing I would encourage people to do is if you're really, really scared, particularly for new leaders, go practice with somebody else. Like go find a peer, a mentor, a coach, like your boss. I don't know, your boss may not want to do that, but find somebody who's going to give you practice the conversation and let the other person pretend and give you resistance, talk you through it so you can prepare a little bit. So you're not like a deer in headlights the first time you have to do it. I do that with a lot of clients and it is incredibly helpful. They always feel stupid in the beginning, but it always is great because I can give them the feedback in real time so that they can say, oh, well, I was going to say this. And I'm like, well, this is what I heard you say. Is that what you mean? Like, this is how it came across. And then immediately they were able to then practice something different that and landed differently. So I would just say those two things is never in anger, stop it if it's spiraling, and practice. Like it sounds goofy, but practice.
I don't know why it sounds goofy. Like, you practice. Look at sports. People don't go out and play the game without practice. I mean, if you're a Ted Lasso fan, you may remember the episode where Ted got very angry with Jamie because he's like, "What do I need this practice thing for?" And like, we practice sports, we practice music, homework. is
Well, and I
practice
mean,
for,
think
like,
about
the
it. Big things
test.
in life. We practice before before a wedding ceremony. We practice a lot of big moments. We practice. You go to Lamaze classes when you're going to have a baby because you're practicing, like all those things. So this is no different. It's
Correct.
just making sure you get it right. And I just want to say thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I would love to have you back at some point because we could talk about a lot of things.
Yes.
But before I know where this is going to be in the show notes, but just quickly, if people were wanting to find you, where's the best place to find you?
So my website is probably the best place, which is readyAimImpact.com. My contact information is there, but go shoot me a note. Would love to connect. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. You can find me everywhere. But I would say probably my website is the best place to find me, and then just connect with me from there.
So for listeners out there, definitely check out Heather. Everything will be in the show notes. But, I feel like the more we can share good, positive ways to make ourselves better, and just realize like we've all done goofy stuff too, like learn from our challenges, learn from our missteps. Not that you won't make your own, but man, if we can help in any way, shape, or form, that's what all this is about. But again, thank you so much, Heather, and I will see you listeners on the next go. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of We've All Done It. I know your time is valuable. That's why I'm for as little BS as possible. Hopefully today's episode has sparked some new ideas for you. If you would like to learn more about the We've All Done It leadership framework or how to work with me, please check out my website at KimberlyJBenoit.com. Until next time.